It was a crisp Saturday morning, the kind that makes you stop and breathe in the cool air, savoring the quiet. I was sitting on the porch, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, watching the sunlight flicker through the trees. My land, my little piece of peace. That's when I heard it. Thud. I sat up, my brow furrowed as another loud thud shook the ground. What the? I stood, setting the coffee down as my stomach tightened. The noise was coming from the stream. My stream. I hurried down the hill, my heartbeat matching the heavy pounding of machinery. And then I saw them, men in yellow vests standing in the water, holding measuring tapes and marking the ground with bright orange flags. A backhoe sat at the edge of the stream, its bucket dipping into the earth like it owned the place. "Hey!" I shouted, jogging toward them. My voice cut through the noise, sharp and angry. A man holding a clipboard turned toward me. He had the tired expression of someone who didn't want to be bothered. "Morning, sir. Can I help you?" "Help me?" My hands clenched at my sides. "What are you doing on my property?" He glanced toward the other workers, like he was hoping one of them would answer. When no one did, he sighed. "We're working on a new bridge project." "Bridge project?" My pulse quickened. "Yeah." He adjusted his hard hat. "HOA approved it last month. It's connecting the neighborhood to the park." "Nobody told me about any bridge," I said, heat rising to my face. "Notice went out in the newsletter," he said. My jaw tightened. "What newsletter?" He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "You'd have to take that up with them Winters." Margaret Winters. Of course. I turned toward the road, and there she was. Margaret, the queen of Willow Creek Estates. She stood at the edge of my property, wearing a red blazer and her signature string of pearls, clipboard in hand, directing the workers like a CEO running a board meeting. My feet were already moving toward her. "Margaret." I called. She turned, her expression calm and composed. "James, what can I do for you? What's going on?" I gestured toward the workers. "Why are they building on my land?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "The board approved the bridge last month. Didn't you get the notice?" "No," I snapped. "And even if I had, you can't build on my property without my permission." Her smile thinned. "Oh, James, it's just a small footbridge. It will raise property values for everyone. It's for the good of the community. It's my land," I said through gritted teeth. "That's not how this works." She gave a soft laugh, the kind that makes you feel like you've already lost the argument. "I'm sure you'll feel differently once it's finished." "Margaret, this is illegal." Her eyes sharpened. "Take it up with the board." She turned and walked away, heels clicking on the pavement. I stood there, heart racing, fists clenched. My land, my stream, and now their bridge? This wasn't over. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, the property deed spread out in front of me. The stream and the land surrounding it was clearly marked as mine. No easement, no exceptions. My hand shook as I picked up a phone and dialed Sophia. "Hey, James," she said after the second ring. "What's going on?" "They're building a bridge on my land," I said, the words sharp in my mouth. "What?" Her tone shifted immediately. "The HOA. They claim it was approved last month. I never signed off on anything." "Send me the deed," she said. "All business now. I'll look it over." 20 minutes later, she called back. "James, this is a slam dunk. Your property line extends to the north side of the stream. They can't build there without your permission." I exhaled shakily. Margaret seems to think otherwise. "She's bluffing," Sophia said. "I'll draft a cease and desist letter tomorrow." "Thanks," I said, running a hand through my hair. The next morning, I woke to the sound of drilling. I stormed down the hill, clutching the cease and desist letter. "Stop," I shouted. The workers hesitated. "Here." I shoved the letter toward the foreman. "Cease and desist. You're trespassing." Margaret appeared, that same cool smile on her face. "James," she said, as if greeting an old friend, "this really isn't necessary. You're building on my land." She sighed, bored. The board approved it. I didn't. Margaret's smile sharpened. James, don't make this difficult. She turned and walked away. The foreman handed the letter back to me. We're just following orders, he said. I stood there, heart pounding, as the construction continued. Sophia filed the cease and desist. The HOA ignored it. By the end of the week, concrete footings were already in place. The skeleton of the bridge was taking shape. I started documenting everything. Photos, videos. I installed security cameras around the property. If they were going to ignore me, I'd make sure I had proof. At the grocery store, I started noticing the stares. Neighbors who used to smile at me now crossed to the other side of the aisle. They're saying you're standing in the way of progress, Sophia told me. Progress. On my land. It got worse. A note appeared in my mailbox. Stop being selfish. Another one said, think about the community for once. One morning, I walked outside and saw it, spray painted across my driveway in red. Selfish. I called Sophia. They're trying to isolate you, she said. Don't engage. Just document it. It was hard not to engage when people I'd known for years now avoided eye contact. When Margaret smiled politely at me during HOA meetings, acting like everything was fine. It was anything but fine. Then the surveyor's marks appeared. Orange flags stretched 12 feet beyond where I thought my property ended. My heart raced as I grabbed my deed and went straight to a surveyor. An hour later, I had my answer. They're building 12 feet into your land, the surveyor confirmed. They're way over the line. Armed with that information, I went straight to Margaret's house. She opened the door, still in that red blazer. You're not just trespassing, I said. You're encroaching. Her smile didn't budge. Surveys can be interpreted in different ways. I held up the report. Not this one. Her smile faded. The board already approved it, she said. I don't care what the board approved, I said calmly. This is illegal. Her eyes darkened. You're making a mistake. I smiled. We'll see. A couple of days after the surveyor confirmed the HOA was building well onto my land, I got a call from an unknown number. Hello. Hi, is this James? A woman's voice asked. Her tone was calm but businesslike. Yes, I said, wary. Who's this? My name is Emily Richardson. I'm with the county environmental office. We receive a report about construction on your property. My heart skipped. Yes, that's right. Well, she sighed, there's something you need to know. I sat up straighter. Go on. The stream on your property, Emily said, is part of protected watershed. I frowned. Protected? Yes, she confirmed. That means any construction in that area requires permits and environmental impact studies. I rubbed my temple. And let me guess, no permits were filed? Correct. My stomach tightened. I could feel the pieces shifting in my mind. What does that mean for the HOA? I asked. Emily's tone sharpened. It means they're in violation of county and state environmental laws. Fines can start at $10,000 per day, possibly more, depending on the damage. I sat back, stunned. Would you be open to meeting tomorrow? She asked. I'll clear my schedule, I said. After the call, I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile forming on my face. Margaret had been so confident, so smug, but now the law was on my side. Emily showed up at my house the next afternoon with a stack of documents and a no-nonsense expression. She laid the papers out on my kitchen table. See this? She pointed to a highlighted section on the property map. This is a Category B wetland. Any construction here requires special permits, environmental studies, and public hearings. And the HOA skipped all that. I asked, completely, what happens next? I'll issue a stop work order, Emily said, but the HOA can appeal. That's where your documentation comes in. I smiled. Good thing I've been documenting everything. Emily smiled back. Then they're in trouble. I followed her to the door, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. For the first time, I wasn't just defending my property. I was playing offense. That sense of victory didn't last long. The next morning, I stepped outside to get the mail and stopped cold. 2 of my car tires were flat, completely destroyed. I crouched down, inspecting them. Clean punctures. This wasn't an accident. My fist tightened as I stood. My phone buzzed. Sophia. They slashed my tires, I said, my voice sharp. Sophia sighed. I'm not surprised. They're trying to intimidate you. Should I call the police? You can, she said, but without camera footage, it'll be hard to prove. I checked the security footage later that day. Nothing. Whoever did it had stayed out of the camera's range. And it didn't stop there. That afternoon, I checked my mailbox and pulled out a handful of notes, all anonymous. Stop blocking progress. Think about the community. You'll regret this. I dropped them into the trash. My hands were shaking. But the worst part wasn't the notes. It was the stares. At the grocery store, people I'd known for years suddenly wouldn't meet my eyes. A group of moms at the deli counter went quiet when I walked by. Excuse me. I turned. Mrs. Jenkins, my neighbor for over a decade, stood near the produce aisle, her arms crossed. Why are you fighting this? She asked, her voice tight. Because it's my land, I said. She shook her head. You're making this harder for everyone. Harder? My eyes narrowed. Margaret built on my property without asking. Mrs. Jenkins sighed. It's for the good of the community. I took a step closer. What if it was your land? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Finally, she walked away. That night, I found another note on my doorstep. You're ruining this for everyone. I stood there in the dark, reading it over and over. My chest tightened. They wanted me to break, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. A few days later, my phone buzzed with another unknown number. Is this the homeowner fighting the Willow Creek Bridge project? My gut tightened. Who's asking? My name's Thomas Reynolds. I'm with Riverside Development. My brow furrowed. Development? Thomas chuckled. Relax. I'm not calling to pressure you. Then why are you calling? I've been following your situation, Thomas said. That bridge they're building? It creates a strategic connection point. Strategic? Yes, he said. The township has been trying to connect their trail system to Willow Creek Park for years. Your property is the key to that connection. I sat up straighter. And Thomas's tone sharpened. If that connection is established, your land becomes extremely valuable. How valuable? To the right buyer? Thomas paused. Millions. I exhaled slowly. Millions? Yes, Thomas said. But here's the thing. Only you can grant those access rights, not the HOA. A slow smile spread across my face. So Margaret is essentially building me a gold mine, I said. Pretty much. I leaned back. Let's talk. The next morning, Thomas slid a folder across the table at Oak Street Coffee. The township has budgeted several million for this connection, he explained. But they have to go through you. So Margaret's a legal bridge, I said, flipping to the papers, could make me rich? Exactly. I smiled. For the first time, this didn't feel like a fight. It felt like a win. That afternoon, I strolled down to the stream. The workers were still hammering away. Margaret was there, clipboard in hand, smiling like the queen of the castle. James, she said, her tone honey-sweet. Change your mind. I smiled. Actually, yes. Her eyes narrowed. Oh, I'm seeing the bigger picture now. Margaret's smile faltered. What does that mean? It means I'm letting you finish. Her eyes flashed with suspicion. Really? I shrugged. Sure. Why not? Margaret's smile returned, but her eyes stayed sharp. Glad you're finally coming around, she said. I didn't say anything. I just smiled. Behind me, the workers kept hammering, building Margaret's biggest mistake. 3 days later, Emily returned with backup, county officials, environmental officers, and a clipboard full of violation notices. Margaret stood at the edge of the property, her expression tight. This construction is unauthorized, Emily announced. Cease all work immediately. Margaret's jaw tightened. You can't. Emily held up the papers. You disturbed a protected watershed. That's a direct violation of state law. Margaret's face paled. You don't have proof. I stepped forward, holding up my phone. I documented everything. I said, photos, videos, timelines. Margaret's eyes narrowed. You set me up. No, I said, you did this to yourself. Emily handed Margaret the official order. Fines start at $10,000 per day. Failure to comply will result in additional penalties. Margaret's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The workers packed up their tools. Neighbors gathered at the edge of the property, whispering. Margaret's empire was crumbling, and I was standing right in the middle of it. It was quiet for a few days after the stop work order. Almost too quiet. Margaret wasn't hovering around the stream anymore, but I could feel her presence, like the tension in the air before a storm. And then my phone rang. Hello? James? A calm male voice. Professional. Yes. This is Daniel Cooper, the Pine Valley Township Manager. Do you have a moment? My brow furrowed. Sure. I heard about the situation with the bridge, he said. I think we may have a solution that benefits everyone. I sat up straighter. Go on. The township has been trying to connect the park to the trail system for years, Daniel explained. That bridge, illegal as it may be, creates the perfect link. My mind started turning. Uh-huh. If the connection is approved, it would complete a major section of the county's Greenway project, Daniel continued. And we'd be prepared to compensate you for easement rights. Compensate. Daniel's tone sharpened. $7 million. I almost dropped the phone. $7 million? Yes, Daniel confirmed. But only the property owner can grant access. The HOA has no say. I rubbed my face, trying to steady my breathing. And what about the environmental violations? I asked. We'd cover any fines, Daniel said. And we'd handle construction properly this time. Permits, studies, everything. My heart pounded in my chest. That's a lot to consider. Daniel chuckled. Take your time. But I have a feeling you already know the answer. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring out the window. $7 million. For a bridge I never wanted. I smiled to myself. Margaret thought she had won. But the game had just changed, and I was holding all the cards. That evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it, and there stood Margaret. No red blazer this time. No clipboard. Just Margaret, wearing a beige sweater and clutching her purse. May I come in? She asked, her voice quieter than usual. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. Sure. She walked into the kitchen and sat down at the table. I stayed standing. I'll get right to the point, Margaret said, her tone clipped. The HOA board met today, and we'd like to offer you $25,000 for an easement, she said smoothly. I almost laughed. $25,000? It's more than fair, Margaret said. Compared to what? She straightened. The bridge will increase property values for everyone if you stop being difficult. I held up a hand. The township offered me $7 million. Her mouth opened, then closed. $7 million? Yep, I said, to complete the connection. Margaret's eyes flashed. That's impossible. It's happening, I said, and they're covering the environmental penalties. Margaret's face darkened. The HOA will fight that. On what grounds? I said, you don't own the land. I do. Her mouth tightened. We can negotiate. I'm not interested, I said. Margaret stood, gripping the edge of the table. Her knuckles were white. You're making a mistake, she hissed. No, I said calmly. You already did. Margaret stared at me for a long moment, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she turned and walked out. As the door clicked shut behind her, I smiled. For the first time in weeks, I felt completely in control. 2 days later, I was watering the flowers in my front yard when Mrs. Jenkins walked by with her little white dog. Morning, I said. She hesitated, adjusting the leash. Morning. I could feel the tension between us. I decided to let her off the hook. I heard about the township's offer, she said carefully. Yeah. It's a lot of money, she added. It is. She shifted uncomfortably. Look, James, I'm sorry for the notes, for not standing up for you. We trusted Margaret. I smiled. I get it. You're not mad. I'd probably have trusted her too, I said. She relaxed. Well, if you do take the offer, It'd be nice to have that trail. We'll see, I said, though I already knew the answer. As Mrs. Jenkins walked away, Todd from down the street gave me a wave. Hey, James. I waved back. It was subtle, but the shift was happening. People were starting to realize Margaret's charm had come at a cost. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like the villain. A week later, I sat across from Daniel at the Pine Valley Township office. The contract sat between us on the table. You sure about this? Daniel asked. Absolutely, I said. I signed the papers. Just like that, it was done. $7 million. I have one condition, I added, setting the pen down. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Oh, I want 10% of the sale, $700,000, put into a trust, I said, for trail maintenance and environmental protection. Daniel smiled. That's generous. It's the right thing to do, I said. 2 days later, the news hit. Township to purchase property for $7 million, complete Greenway Trail. My phone blew up with texts. Neighbors congratulating me. Todd even stopped by with a 6-pack of beer. You pulled it off, he said, shaking his head. Yeah, I said. Guess I did. The construction crew returned that week, but this time not to build a legal bridge. They were dismantling it, and soon a new bridge, one with proper permits and environmental oversight, would stand in its place. 2 weeks later, I was walking down the newly restored trail when I saw Margaret standing near the stream. She was wearing a cardigan, arms crossed, looking smaller somehow. Hey, I said. She turned. James. I stopped a few feet away. Nice day. She nodded. It is. An awkward silence stretched between us. I heard you donated part of the sale to the trail fund, she said. Yeah, I said. Seemed like the right thing to do. Margaret's lips curved into a small smile. You could have taken the money and left. I could have, I said. She hesitated. I should have handled things differently. You think? Margaret sighed. I was trying to do what was best for the community. You bulldozed over me to do it, I said. She nodded. Lesson learned. We stood there for a moment. Then Margaret held out her hand. I took it. Take care, James, she said. You too. As she walked away, I stayed by the stream for a moment, watching the water ripple over the rocks. Later that afternoon, Eleanor stopped by with a gift. We wanted you to have this, she said, handing me an envelope. Inside was a framed picture of the new trail map. Beneath it were the words, Willow Creek Nature Corridor, made possible by James Anderson's generosity. My throat tightened. Thank you, I said. Eleanor smiled. You earned it. As I drove away from Willow Creek for the last time, I smiled. The bridge Margaret built to walk over me had lifted me higher than I ever imagined, and that felt better than $7 million.